Well, have I got some totally epic thrift store flips for you today. Welcome to my crafting channel. I'm Alana from Upcycling NZ. Here's a little sneak peek of what's in store for you. I'm not going to give away too much, but let's just say that I can't take my eyes off these projects. I just love them so much. So what I thrifted was this bunch of artificial flowers for $4. Online, the closest thing I could find were these poppies for $12.18 per stem. With the pro tiers, they were $6.38 per stem. And there was a little bonus stem of roses in there, and the closest thing I could find retailed for $5.23 per stem. So I felt like these were a real bargain. They're quite long stems, other than the rose, but they're pretty dusty and grubby. The next item is a bird cage, and I actually got this for free. We do a thing called second-hand Sundays in the area that I live, and everyone can put anything they don't need out on the curbside, and you can drive around and collect anything that you might be able to use. I found that these were actually quite cheap and retail for just under $70. This is a little flower pot. I also got that for free on second-hand Sundays, and it's got some nice little soft pads at the base. The next items were thrifted, and they only cost me $1.50 for these 3 hardcover books. I'll always have a few of these lying around, and I'll have to buy some more because these were the last 3 I had. Then I only have one more item to go, and that's this little black frame that I thrifted for $1. It has an ornate asymmetrical plastic black frame. It had no glass and a red velvet background. So now let's upcycle, my favourite part. I'll start by removing all of the attachments and extras off this cage. I'll also remove the little wires that are holding the cage to the base, but I'll keep those for later. I found that this cage was in excellent condition. It wasn't even very dirty. It was a bit dusty, but that was about it. It had a tiny bit of paint deterioration, and it was missing the top, which allowed it to hang, but I'm not going to be hanging this, so I'm not worried. Next, I'm taking the artificial flowers, and a lot of people don't know that you can wash these. They're made of fabric rather than paper, most of them, or some kind of silk. I'm not 100% sure, but I'll just soak them for a little bit, and then I'll take a cloth and I will just clean all the leaves and the petals up. And I'm just using dishwashing liquid and hot water. So I'll do the same to all of them. And once they're clean, I was bending all of the leaves upright so that I could hang these upside down to dry. All of these flowers had wires in them. You can see how dirty they were. Look at the colour of the water, and they also got a lot brighter once they'd been washed. And here's my bouquet of flowers all washed and dried. They're actually really beautiful. I'm not big on artificial flowers, but these are gorgeous. So I'm just going to repair a couple of things that fell off in the washing process. So I'll just put these little flower buds back on. And I'm just using hot glue for that. The one rose stem that I had was missing a flower, so I'll just clip off the stem that was holding that. I want to be putting this bouquet in my bird cage, so I've measured how tall I want my stems to be, and I need them to be 60 centimetres, so I'm actually going to cut quite a bit off. So I'll mark where I want them cut off with permanent marker, and I tried several tools and ended up having to use a hacksaw to get through the wires because they're actually really thick. And I just went through partially and then bent them back so that they snapped. Then I used some wire cutters to get the rest of the plastic off. I noticed the cut-off pieces had been hot glued at the bottom, so I'll hot glue these as well to make sure my flowers stay together. With the poppies, I'm going to leave them full length. They're quite bendy, and I'm going to twist those around the bunch, which will make them a bit shorter to hold the whole thing together. The little rose stem was too short, so I'm going to add a skewer stick, and I'm taking some of the plastic from the pro tiers, cutting that in half, and I'll wrap that around the stick and the stem to create some length, and the plastic should provide enough support for both. I'll hot glue that and use clamps to hold it in place while it's setting. These are actually not clamps, these are actually clothes pegs, but they are fantastic for crafting. I got those from my sister-in-law. This still didn't make my stem quite long enough, so there'll be a little bit of skewer stick still protruding from the end, but that's going to be hidden by floral foam anyway. So all my flowers are ready to use now, and I'll get back to the bird cage and I'll give that a really good clean. It wasn't very dirty, so that was pretty easy, and I wiped down all of the cage outside. I decided to remove all of the 3 sliding doors on the cage, and I just had to open up the little loops and they came off really easily. I'm going to paint these gold, and I had a couple of types of paint, but I found out that the Folk Art metallic gold paint is actually for indoor and outdoor use. So I thought that would be much wiser in case I ever wanted to use this outside. This is an acrylic water-based paint, and I'm going to sponge it on just because a brush is just going to be a bit too messy for this job. I allowed these to dry and gave them a second coat, and that was all they needed. On the cage I'm using an acrylic exterior black, and I'm just doing a touch-up job really, just around any areas where the paint had degraded. And I'm just applying that with a sponge to the outside very lightly, and I didn't bother doing the inside. Once everything had dried, I put the little doors back on the cage. Now you can find the doors easily. It really annoys me when you can't find the doors on a bird cage. Doesn't that look adorable? Now with my little plant pot. I quite liked the colour of it because it's quite red underneath, but it wasn't the same red as my flowers, so I'm going to have to change the colour. I'll use the same black exterior paint. Just while I'm doing that, can you figure out why I've not painted the little pads at the bottom? I'm sure you would have guessed it, so that when I turn it over, I can continue painting and not get any paint on my surface. Then once my first coat had dried off, I'm taking this little hot glue mould that I made. There's a little bit of damage from where I repaired it there, but it's going to be painted anyway. And it had a bulbous surface there, which made it hard to use for anything. So I'm just going to melt that down and attach it to the front of my little pot. Then I'll add a bit more hot glue just to make sure that the edges stay down. Normally you'd have to use a bit of another type of glue to make sure it stayed down, but this stuck really well to the surface. Now I'll give the mould and the rest of the pot another coat of paint. I'm using a brush because it's the only way to get into those really tiny little corners in the mould. So if you're wondering where I'm going with all this, stick with me because it comes together beautifully, this project. So next I'm taking some more of the gold paint, and I'm just offloading a lot of the paint and using my Dobber sponge brush. I wish I had thought to do this earlier. I used to use my finger, but there was a lot less control. Using the Dob stick I have so much more control. And now for some ASMR, even though I had to look up what that meant. I'm not entirely sure that I nailed that for you, but I love the sound and feeling of cutting through floral foam. It's like slicing through soft butter. So I'm just putting my poppies into the floral foam first, You'll see I've got them all twisted around, and I'm kind of creating a surround for the rest of my flowers. My pot is hot glued down so it didn't move. Next I'll add those proteas. And just a disclaimer, I am no flower arranger at all. I don't have much experience whatsoever. So what I'm showing you on film looks great, but actually I played around with this for a very long time. So that's the magic of editing. But those flowers are just gorgeous, especially once I opened all those leaves up. Well, I think I did all right. What do you think? I'd love to know your thoughts, so let me know in the comments. In the base, I don't want that floral foam showing. I don't have any mosses or anything, but I did have this little plastic greenery, which is very short, and I didn't have very much, so I'm just using what I had left and trying to cover as much of that foam as possible. I had just a few leaves to fill that last void, and now I can drop my cage over the bouquet. To secure the cage back to the base, I'm just using the little bits of wire that came off, and I'll just use the pliers to push them back on. And then I'm going to sit this on my little Steampunk side table that I created a while ago. I'll add a link to the description if you want to see how I made that. And now this project's in my living room and I can't take my eyes off it. I absolutely love it. Now moving on to the next project, the hardcover books. I want to create a very vintage looking book stack with these. So I've got these beautiful papers from the Temu website. I'll start with one of the smaller books, and I can make use of these cut down pieces for this. I'm just going to size them to the book cover, to one side of the book cover, and make sure I've got about 10 centimetres extra at least of the size of the cover. You can definitely go more than that if you need to. I'm using a paper cutter, but you can mark it and cut it with scissors. Of all the glues, I find the glue stick is the best for this project. You won't get any wrinkles or air bubbles with it as long as you apply the glue completely without missing any spots to your piece of paper. And it's the pressure that I'm going to apply with my little spatula that will ensure that it will not lift. So line up your book. You can be a little bit away from the spine because I'm going to put a piece around the spine anyway. And I'm using the spatula that came with my transfers. You could use a credit card for that. Now that paper is beautiful and flat on the surface of my cover. And I'm cutting a little bit more than a right angle off the corners, just to ensure that they overlap once they're folded in. You'll notice that I've cut it millimetres away from the corner, and I've learnt that this is how you tuck the corners in and you won't have any raw edges showing. So I'll just tuck that under with my fingernail before I fold the other side over. And I'll repeat that on the other side using my spatula to add that pressure to all of those flaps. Then I'll just add a little pressure to the corners and round those off. And then I'll just repeat that process on the other side. The only thing you need to watch for when you're doing this is that if your paper has a right way up, ensure that it's matching the print inside your book. My one was one side one way and one side the other, but it didn't really matter with the print. Next I'm using this piece of paper for the spine, and I'm going to use those vertical lines to cut each piece, and I should be able to get 3 books out of this piece. I've measured it to make sure that it covers my other pieces of paper on the book when you wrap it around. It's really important that this piece is straight when you add it to the spine of the book, so make sure you line that up really well. I'll apply pressure to the spine of the book first, because when you turn it over to the flat, there's a little groove there that you need to run your paper flat against. And that way when you open your book it won't pucker or lift. Doing the corners are a little bit tricky. What I generally do is fold it over first so that I know exactly how much I need to trim off the edge if it's too long. Whenever I've tried to guess it, I've always cut it off too short, so I won't make that mistake again. I also cut a little slot in each corner of the spine, and that will just help the pieces to fold over each other when I flatten them down. I'm using my fingernail or a pencil to get right into the very corner, and pressure is your friend, so I'm applying a lot of pressure with that spatula and using pressure to round off those corners. And there you go, it looks like I bought one. So then I repeated that process on all 3 books, and this is what they look like together. I want to put embellishments on the front of the books, so I'm taking these impression mats, which are actually for icing on cakes. I've used this technique once before and I know that these look great on the front of a book. So I'm going to cut 3 of my little impressions out. I'm kind of eyeballing it, and my cutter didn't get all of the way through the plastic, but they separate very easily, so I'll leave them attached to each other for now. I'm also going to cut the rectangle around the impressions to a nice shape. And now my impressions are looking quite uniform with each other. Then I'm going to paint them in the same black that I've been using, and then when they were dry I gave them a second coat. Now this is definitely the most fun part. I'll take some more of my gold, squeezed out a bit more than I need there, but I'll brush that back into the container afterwards. And I'm just going to use that sponge brush technique, and the result is awesome. You get this wonderful ornate looking embellishment from it. I feel like these need a black accent, so I've got some faux leather and it's on like a Duofilm back. So I've marked out the size of one of my little embellishments, and I'll cut out the outside and then I'll cut the inside out as well and create a little frame with it. And I'm just snipping that close to the line where I want to cut, so I'm not wasting any of those offcuts. I'll use them for another project. I love when there's grid lines on the back because it's easy to get a nice straight line that way. Now my little frame will fit over top of that, and I'll make all 3 of them. Now I can start to attach them to my books, and I'm using a glue stick just to hold that in place until I put the sticky back of the frame over top. I think my books are now starting to take on that really old age vintage look, which I was going for, and I just love that look. I can see me changing the whole decor of a room just so that I could have it all in this style one day. And that's my 3 books finished. So now these could be displayed just like that, or put them together and have a stack sitting on your coffee table. But I'll carry on and tie the stack together for you. Now I'm just sponge brushing on some gold paint to the edges of all the pages, and I'll do that to all 3. It didn't really cause the pages to stick together, but I fanned them out to dry anyway. Now I can add a black ribbon to create a book stack, and I'll just tie that in a bow. I want to add a little decorative clip to this as well. So I found this little piece of broken jewellery which looks a bit like a brooch, but it's got a clip-on earring back to it. And I'll add this gorgeous little dusty pink rose with some beads hanging from it with hot glue. And that can just be clipped onto the front bow or onto the side. And now for the little black frame. This is going to be a really fast little flip. The frame can stand, and it also has a little loop on the back to hang it from if you want to hang it. The velvet's in great condition, it's just a little bit dusty. So I'm going to open the frame up and I'll be keeping the velvet. It's a bit rough around the edges where it's attached, so I'll trim that up. This will make the back close up a bit easier as well. So I won't be covering this up with a picture like you would normally do in a frame. And here's a little hack for cleaning up velvet. Just use some packing tape and that will lift any fibres and dust off the surface of your velvet. A couple of the corners had lifted, so I'll just glue those down. I'm not going to use a wet glue because I don't want it to seep through the velvet and show. And my glue stick did the trick. You'll see a little honeybee fly through the shot about now. I invited him to have a look because he seemed very interested in my project. They are pretty non-aggressive honeybees as long as you don't threaten their lives or the hive. So I don't want to scare him because if he stings me he'll die afterwards. We really protect our honeybees in New Zealand because they're so important to our ecosystem. I found another piece of glass that was the same size from another old frame, and I'll give that a really good clean with some window cleaner and set it aside. Now I'll turn my frame over and I'm going to highlight all the high points on the frame using my gold paint, and I'll use the sponge method again. I just love this bit. Look at the effect that it has. Really makes that frame pop. And that makes it tie in with all my projects today, which are kind of dark and moody, vintage. Now I'm probably being a bit pedantic, but there are a few scuff marks on the back of the frame. I tried to cover them with permanent marker and you could see the marker quite clearly, so I tested the paint and it was not close enough in colour, so I had to paint the whole back of the frame. Of course you don't really see that, so you don't have to do that. So now my frame's dry, I'll put the glass back in, and I bet you're wondering what I'm putting in the frame. Well, I've got these two Australian 50-cent coins, and they are collector's items. They're not worth very much, but I've got two of them, so I can display the face of one and the back of the other. They're from Prince Charles and Lady Diana's wedding, and they're not worth a lot at the moment, but I figure if I protect them and look after them in this frame, perhaps my grandchildren might find they're worth something one day. Of course, that's when I get grandchildren. At the moment, my grandchildren are two cats. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe if you've enjoyed that, and we're ready for the reveal. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed the video, please give me a thumbs up. I'm trying really hard to grow my channel. See you next time.